All right, so welcome to yet another Metalogix Quick Take session. This is the series where we kind of take a small sub-concept or topic, something maybe a troubleshooting tip or a functionality concept, and we kind of just dig into it for about 30 minutes, invite questions, and then record the meeting and make it available after the fact. So today, first off, my name is Roy. I'm the lead Metalogix representative for Diagnostic Manager. I also do pre-sales solution engineering for the tools, this and backup. Got quite a few years of experience working with this tool since it was originally conceived. And I've had the opportunity to watch its feature set grow over the years, and as such, I've kind of seen it all. So I'm eager to share some of that information and expertise with you guys. Today's meeting is all about configuring alert responses and notifications. So what does that mean? So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to review alerting. We're going to talk about setting up alerts and ensuring that we get alert data to respond to. We're going to manage some of those alert thresholds a little bit and just look at the different options. And then we're going to configure alerts for different scopes, whether at the farm level, the server level, etc. And then the meat of the meeting will be all about alert responses. You know, what is an alert response? How to go about setting up rules for these responses, configuring the various conditions, and then configuring the various actions that are available in response to the alert statuses, i.e. Writing events to the log, sending out an email notification, or even generating an SNMP trap for management in that manner. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kind of jump right into the meat of the presentation, and let's take a look at my environment here. So you're seeing Diagnostic Manager version 4.4, and I've got quite a few different farms set up here. We're going to be focused on my abc.com farm. This is an on-premises SharePoint 2013 farm consisting of a couple of servers, one of which is a SQL server, one of which is an app/WFE server. And as you can see right off the bat, if I select, I've got quite a few alerts relevant specifically to this farm. I can see that memory usage is high, log file sizes are high on my different SQL databases, some disk issues on my app server, web front end, various things. So let's dig in here and actually look at the servers themselves, and more importantly, let's look at the alert configurations. In fact, let's actually start there. So if I go to the alerting tab, while the abc.com farm is in context, my buttons here for default and alert thresholds will be relevant to this farm. So I want to take a look at the default alert thresholds template, so to speak. This default alert threshold is basically the template that's going to get applied to any farms or servers that get added to the tool from the get-go, right? So this is like our starting point, so to speak, a template. And this can be adjusted. But as we can see here, this is going to cover all the different metrics that are available to be collected and alerted upon within Diagnostic Manager. As opposed to if I were to select, for instance, a particular server and look at the alert thresholds view for that particular server, I'll see a pared down contextual representation of what alerts are relevant to that particular server. So now some of the, for instance, some of the other metrics may not be in this list. A better example would probably be if I select the SQL server, we'll see stuff specific to SQL, but not necessarily things around SharePoint or web or network metrics. So the point here being, I've got a template for incoming new servers, and then I've got a scoped alert thresholds relevant to the selected node. So if I'm on my SQL server here and I want to look at my alerts, just click our button. And this is kind of straightforward, but I mean, essentially in our dialog, we're going to be able to kind of manage and massage the different values that we've got set and enable and disable different metric alerts as we need them. So what should be noted here is that we collect all of these points. All of this data is collected, But as you can see out of the box, we only really alert on a subset of those. These are the checked ones, right? So for instance, in the memory subsection, I definitely create alerts based on pages per second and memory usage percent, but I don't necessarily out of the box have a total physical memory alert set up or a per process pool non-page bytes, etc., etc. We can certainly enable those if we want, but as you can see here, I'm just collecting stuff. I'm most interested in, where's my memory at? Is it high? Do I need to add more memory to the SQL Server? Do I need to pull back? What's the case there? And then over on the SQL side, we can see I've got a couple of things enabled here. Things around deadlocking, things around logins and logouts, whether the services are running or not. And then at the database level, is the data file size beyond a certain measure? Is the log file size growing or near its maximum size? Is it beyond a certain size, et cetera, et cetera? These are the kind of things that, will be relevant from a SQL perspective, in my opinion, most relevant types of things. Other things you might want to monitor, data file size total. If you have a cap on the total file size of all your data, you might want to look at that as a potential monitoring concept. But at any rate, the point here is I can definitely go in and change these values per my needs in my environment, right? So let's say that in my case, if the data file size at this point gets beyond, what is this, like 100 gigs or something like that, maybe I want to change that to 50 gigs, or maybe I want to change it to 200 gigs and change the critical to a different. As sizing grows over time, we're seeing, a lot of enterprises live in the terabyte realm now, so these things may no longer be true industry standards, but they're just meant to be a starting point to get you in here playing with the values, right? What's really cool about the alerts is this graph view that'll give me basically the baseline of where things have been sitting over the past X number of hours or days. So for instance, if I want to look at database fragmentation, I can see where the values have been for different databases. If I want to look at my memory usage, again, that's a good example. It's probably going to be terrible in this environment, but memory usage percent, I can see that it's consistently been around the, it looks like 88, 87%. Looks like the average value is 87. So this kind of, and we can see, right, a definite valley on the 17th, something freed up at that point. But the point here is we can use this as a basis from which to determine what is a warning and what is a critical, right? So here's my thresholds, here's my baseline, here's what things are actually collecting at. Where do I need to set the warning and thresholds? Now, obviously, this is an extreme case because, 87, 82 average is not great, right? Typically, you'd probably want to be around the 50% mark or less if possible, but hopefully it illustrates the point pretty well. But so yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on actual threshold management, but hopefully the principle is understood here. And obviously, whenever we finalize what our values are, we can apply those changes or apply them to different servers in the farm if need be, or set it as the default, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so alert threshold management 101, right? So now we know what our tool is doing, we know what the environment's giving us back, we know what we care to alert upon. What do we do with those alerts now that we got them? So it's one thing to have a bunch of yellow and red in the tool. It's great to be able to open the tool, go to the home screen and see what's problematic in real time, fine. But with a tool like DM, the key is being proactive and not reactive, right? So I don't want to jump in the morning and see what already was a problem overnight. I want to get alerted, in real time when things are wrong so that I can jump into action like Superman in the middle of the night and make sure that the end user experience at 8 a.m. isn't compromised by something as fickle as a fragmentation alert or a data file size getting too big. Or I want to see when there's a critical issue, like when a site is not responding for whatever reason. I want to be able to get in there and fix it before end users even know that it exists. So this is the real premier concept in terms of a tool like DM. So that's what I want to set up. And I think the crux of that concept in terms of being proactive is the alert responses, right? So we've defined a set of thresholds that determine what is warning, what is critical. But now the secondary approach, we need to define, well, what action am I going to take when said metric is warning or critical? And in our alert responses dialog here, we've got a lot of capability to do so. And we'll look at these other two things over here from the context of our alert responses dialog, but just note the email settings and SNMP settings buttons there. In fact, let's go ahead and look at those first. Email settings is pretty straightforward. We're just configuring an SMTP server to manage and use as the email notification system. In my case, I'm using my internal mail server. SNMP is basically the same thing, and if you have any familiarity with an SNMP technology, there's tons of them out there. You basically give the SNMP server address, use whatever port is configured for it, and then if you have sub-communities, and communities are, without getting too far into it, communities are essentially subgroups of SNMP configurations, and yeah, you can say, in essence, you can set all that stuff up here, so that's where the trap goes to, and then once it gets to the trap, it gets managed separately, right? So that said, let's look at our responses here, and the dialogue here is kind of set up to mimic what you might have experienced with Outlook rules. Now, when you set up an Outlook rule, obviously you're setting up conditions, you're telling it to do X when Y is the case, so on and so forth. Simple logic, and it's the same thing here. So if you notice, I've got quite a few different rules set up. I've got a generic overall server performance metrics rule, and I've got it enabled. And I'm telling this that when the severity is first raised to warning or critical for any server metric from the following two servers, please take the following action. And that action, in this case, is just write an entry to the event log, to the Windows application event log. So if I open the app event log now, I'll probably see quite a few things from history of alerts, warnings, and criticals that have fired against these two servers, right? So that's one example. Another example from the page load time, when the severity is first raised to warning or critical for either page load time metric or the page unavailable metric in regard to these particular pages. Now, if you look at these, here, let me go to this one first. If you look at the selected metrics editor, it's basically just going to give you a list of all the different metrics that we can alert upon. This should mimic or parallel exactly the alert thresholds view from the default alert thresholds dialog. So yeah, we're just drilling in and defining, hey, these are the metrics I care about for this rule. In my case, I went to, page metrics, page load times, right? And thus those two metrics are showing here. So anytime one of these pages has warning or critical status load time or warning or critical status availability, I'll get an email shot out to my email address. And I can configure this with semicolon to have any number or distribution list or whatever the case may be. And again, from here, I can hot link over to the configuration for the email SMTP server. Same is true for SNMP. Pretty straightforward stuff, but it really gets fun, pardon me, when you start to do trickier things. So SQL Server stats, let's say I only want to be warned when the severity gets to critical. I only want to get a notification when it's critical. Warning, I'm happy to look at in the morning and see that things are at the warning level because I've got a bit of a buffer. I can still be proactive in that sense, but critical is when things need immediate action. So I want a notification go into my email when that happens, right? Other options in here is every time severity is anything other than okay. And by every time, that means, by default, we're collecting these data points every 6 minutes. So every time means every 6 minutes, if the severity is not okay, send an email. In other words, keep pinging me until I fix it every 6 minutes. Same thing here. Every time it's critical, every 6 minutes, if the status is still critical, send another email notification. Anytime the severity changes, if it goes from okay to warning, if it goes from warning to critical, if it goes from critical to okay, send an email. And then if the severity returns to okay. So this is kind of an interesting option. I'm not sure. I guess it would be a secondary rule. Like, for instance, have one rule set for anytime the SQL Server metrics first go to warning or critical, then have a second rule set up to notify maybe my management team when that goes back to okay, right? So I get warned, and so do they when it goes to critical, but then once I've fixed the thing, an email gets shot out to my bosses, for instance, letting them know, hey, Roy's taking care of the problem, things are back on track, right? So I mean, there's a few different options and use cases, obviously, but the general principle is we've got some variability in terms of when and why we alert, and then obviously we select the specific metrics, and more importantly, the specific scope. For instance, SQL Server metrics are what or memory, I should say, and SQL Server metrics are what I've got set up in here. So obviously, I really only need that to apply to my SQL server in abc.com. Right? Now I could just have it go against everything in the farm, but that's really not a very logical scope because only the SQL server is ever going to be, it's only ever going to be relevant to the SQL server. Yeah, so I've got it configured to send an email to me, and I just so happens I do have such an alert status, right? So if I look in SQL, I can definitely see that in the resources, memory usage is set to warning. And as you saw in my alert rule, I've got it set to tell me anytime the severity is raised to warning or critical for any of those metrics, send me an email. So I just happen to have such an email on this side. Let me just pull that up. I could show you what that looks like. All right, so here's the alert that I received. A system scan of server SQL that finished at timestamp found alerts for system metrics that you should be aware of. The following are alerts for metrics that have exceeded the warning or critical thresholds. And then it gives me the specifics of what it alerted upon, gives me the severity that it was alerted to, and then it gives me a link to a Metalogix knowledge base article that talks a little bit about that particular metric, and this is the link that just gave me. Just a quick blurb about what memory usage means. I mean, this is a no-brainer one, obviously, but some of these metrics are a little bit esoteric and may, things like processor queue length. You'd be surprised how many people don't understand what processor queue length does. So we try to give a little bit of a blurb as much as we can without being too overly verbose on the subject. Obviously, with a monitoring tool, there's obviously going to be some level of responsibility on the admin to kind of research the problems and know what to do in response. But yeah, so we give you the message. I have a footer that says that it was sent from Diagnostic Manager, and the machine that hosts the collection service that actually did the work, sent from the collection service on 2010A, and that's the machine I have my tool installed to. So yeah, that's basically the kind of top-down crash course, so to speak, in alert responses. The key summary here is, it's a life cycle approach. So at the front end of it, we've got an alert threshold. We define what is considered a warning or a critical in your environment for all the various metrics that are available. We collect the metrics, we compare them to that threshold definition, and we generate yellows and reds, alerts, based on that comparison. Once those are in, we then have rules that refer to those yellows and reds and take actions based upon them. The simple example being when the memory usage alert became yellow, this rule kicked into play and sent an email off to me per the definition that I defined. So I hope this makes a lot of sense. It's really pretty straightforward, but I think it's worth focusing on. So if there are any questions at this point, we've got about 10 minutes So if there's a question out there, feel free to ping it out to me via the question chat. Otherwise, we maybe can get another 10 minutes of our day back. So I'll stand by here for a moment, see if anything comes in. And if not, yep. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank everyone who attended, and I appreciate your attendance. And please be on the lookout for the next Metalogix Quick Take session regarding Diagnostic Manager, where we'll probably, it'll probably be something in the high-level theoretical scope. So maybe talking about best practices for monitoring or how to go about making sense out of the metric data that we're getting, things of that nature. And we'll look at some other options around O365 that are coming and things of that nature. So once again, I thank everyone for your attendance and have a fantastic day. We'll see you at the next one. Take care.